push ahead and people will just come in. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. Our next session is entitled M&A Activity in Shipping, Finance and Technology as a Driver Towards Decarbonisation. On the panel, we have Hugh Crooks, Chief Financial Officer, Ridgebury Tankers. We have Carlos Pena Pellegrini, Chief Commercial Officer of Sea Transport Maritime and Director of Goodbulk. Kim Ballet, Chief Financial Officer of Torm. Alex Lee, Chief Operating Officer of Taylor Maritime Investments. And our moderator, Mark Toole, Partner, Watson, Farley and Williams. Mark, please.
Thank you, Kevin. And thank you, panel, for joining us this afternoon. First, I probably ought to address the elephant in the room, or at least on the agenda. When the panel and I had a pre-discussion in preparation for this session, it very quickly became clear that we didn't consider that traditional M&A was in fact a major driver towards decarbonisation, regardless of type of cargo, vessel size or geography of the operations. That said, scale is clearly important, and there is a critical mass that's required for owners and operators to make significant investments in technology and other decarbonisation measures. In particular, smaller owners and operators may lack the resources to pursue emissions targets in the same way as larger ship owners. However, greater collaboration is likely to be key for industry as a whole, whether it's through corporate joint ventures, contractual joint ventures, or more specialist partnerships. And so the focus of the next 25 minutes or so will be to identify some of the decarbonisation drivers and other considerations for ship owners, and how they inform both what activities are undertaken to reduce emissions and also what types of collaboration can best support these activities. So I think it's fair to say that the roadmap to 2026 and possibly 2030 is somewhat clear, but thereafter the route to 2050 is really quite uncertain. And there's probably no industry consensus on where ship owners and other stakeholders should be focusing their efforts. Perhaps, Hugh, if I could turn to you first. I mean, is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, the short term is clear in a sense, in that we, you know, I think people have joined together and started to, you know, understand the language and the challenge. But we're also realizing that there's very little that we can do right now that gets you know, to the 2050 targets. And in fact, so I was on Friday. I think they were speaking earlier at the Maersk McKinney Center for Decarbonization in Copenhagen, where they're doing, you know, phenomenal work. And it's an example where the larger, you know, players are seconding people and putting like real resources into trying to tackle the technical challenges, you know, not just policy and things. But they put up the really common chart that we've all seen, which is sort of like a line for business as usual, and then it's got these IMO targets that line starts quite steeply, and then the path becomes less steep out to 2050. And in discussion, we think it's a little bit different, and in some ways, which I think makes it more encouraging, because you get discouraged every year that goes by. That first part of the curve gets steeper and steeper because it feels like we're not making progress. But I think, like every other technology, a new technology, there's always, you know, what they call an S-curve. You know, electric cars aren't useful, aren't widely adopted, and you can try and push on all the policy, but they're not quite there until they are there. And then, you know, things can really take off. And I think that's where we find ourselves a little bit in shipping right now. And the good news, it's not window dressing. I see people working really, really hard to solve these things. For the rest of us who don't have the resources to, you know, second top technical people into these efforts, and we're doing there, this short term is really about absolutely minimizing, you know, your energy consumption, your carbon emissions in the meantime, and making sure the existing fleet is, you know, is emitting as little as possible, while recognizing that's not sufficient to get us to those long-term targets.
Yes, because I think those longer-term targets, it requires perhaps more of an existential consideration of a shipping business, because whereas you hopefully know where you're going to be or where you're aiming to be in 2025, 2030, 2050 is a long way out. And you're not looking just at your own business, but you're looking at the businesses of your customers.
And I think we'll pass that to someone else. For us in tankers, it's essentially it's like a differential equation, because we're carrying liquid carbon and we're burning liquid carbon, and it's hard to, as you envision what you're going to be burning, you have to be very much thinking about what the world is burning. Compared to a container line where they can imagine their business, I think, roughly the same, just change the fuel. Yeah. Our considerations are a little more complicated for that.
Yeah. On bulkers, we carry coal as well, so we have a little bit of the same. But it's true. I think when you enter on a project as a ship owner with a view of 20 years' time on your ship, and you go today, order in the yard, you are going to get delivery 2025. We are going towards 2045 then when the project's end. And the uncertainty out there is really big. I mean, probably one of the reasons why we have the order book so low in the bulker side. As you were saying, I don't see the M&A working on helping on this one. There is a lot of improvement that you can do on the fleets. Technologically, probably is a more handful thing at the moment. But the information available for smaller owners, as you say, and the money needed to invest on research is so big that probably working together in certain pools or something like that, it could help the owners to visualize and perform better on this condition. On top, you add that the restriction coming in 2023, you have, I don't know, 70–80% of the fleet that will not be in condition to do it. So most of the ship will be slowing down for the time being. So there are things that we can do today, but we're still short of it.
I very much agree with what you are saying around the 2050 and the way we are in product tank also, as you know. So the way we think about it is on the long run, we are joining up in partnerships. So for instance, you talked about the Maersk Center for Zero Carbon Shipping, that's one. And that's where we believe we shall put our efforts in for the long run, because we are not that big that we can sort of take the first mover risk. That's in there. That's not our legacy right now, at least. I think and then we have on the short term, we actually believe that there's an immense you can do. A lot of projects that you can embark on. We have a portfolio of projects that we are developing as we speak. Some are within hardware, gadgets, sensoring ships all over. It makes sense to put sensors on a ship. It is algorithm, smart shipping, and it is, as some of you probably seen, it's flattener rotors, it's air lubrication. You can do a lot of stuff that is actually also from a business point of view pretty lucrative with very short payback period. So it's a matter of setting up, I think, a strategy, and you need a team. You also asked about that, and Mark, you need an in-house team if you really want to do it. But if you do it and you are focused on it, there's a lot of initiatives out there that really make sense from a decarbonization point of view. And then the last thing, on the medium term, that was a short and then the medium term, you alluded to it, being in the product tanker space, knowing that fossil fuels at some point in time will not be the prevailing fuel. Of course, you are constantly debating, so what could be our business model from 2040 and beyond, or something like that. And that's just interesting, and it is very difficult to have an answer to that. If we had, we would have done something. But you need to be in a constant dialogue with a lot of potential partners out there. And hopefully at some point in time, the right thing is there, but you need to spend time on it also.
Yeah. Thank you, Kim. I mean, moving to you, Alex, Taylor Maritime Investments, a listed company. Clearly there are drivers or pressures on you as a listed company that focus your mind on decarbonisation.
Yeah, I mean, I would say very healthy conversations had from day one of the IPO process with our investors. We found ourselves having to lead on this topic. in the presentations during the roadshow, and have had the benefit of scale. I mean, I think you're quite right that M&A in itself isn't a driver of decarbonisation, but scale, no doubt, has a very important role to play in terms of access to capital, grabbing the attention of potential partners and service providers who can help us get to where we want to be in our near-term goals. Specifically, we're operating a tonnage provider model, and so we very much rely on a symbiotic relationship with our charterers who will lead the demand. So the focus really from our side has been on conversations with charterers, being very selective about who we, even more than usual, about who we enter into longer-term contracts with, because it's those conversations they're going to lead to us driving improvements on our ships. Going to what some of the other panelists have said, you know, the focus for us in the near term has been on tweaking the specs of the ship, investing in shorter-term measures. But the key that we feel is to be prudent about our balance sheet and to be ready to invest in capex in the new technology, new engines, whatever, when they become available. We're not the subject matter experts in engine types or fuels, but we are prudent guardians of the balance sheet for our listed shareholders. So that's the perspective that we have.
Thank you. And one for the panel, just your views on what sorts of collaborations, or rather collaborations with what types of stakeholders do you see as having, you know, the most benefit or the most effect in your drive towards decarbonisation? So is it equipment manufacturers? Is it other owners, other operators? You know, what type of stakeholder, and what are you trying to get out of those collaborations? Perhaps, Carlos, if I can come to you.
I think we have to look for partnership with our clients, I mean, to be aligned with them, what are they looking for. The final solution of what fuel are we going to use is, I think, is also a question mark for them. I mean, I can give you an example where we got a new Cape X-Yard, I don't know, 30 days ago, and one of the larger grain commodities asked us to burn biofuel. And biofuel is $1,000 more per ton. These ships consume 40 tons, it's 40 grand more daily. On a normal front on a Cape is 65 days is $2.5 million. So it's an exercise that we need to work together with your clients. Of course, there is conversation with your peers or your other owners and at the level of, in our case, pools, where we have a group of owners that we share views. But I think it's very, very important the client will.
Yeah. Kim?
Yeah, I think for us it is, it could be a variety of things, but it could be on data and AI, where you would partner up, and it could be on, as you said, the equipment manufacturers, definitely, but also on proprietary development of certain technologies that we did it on when we did scrubbers. We made a JV there, so that's something we're very familiar with. We could do that again. And just one thing is that partnering up and JVs, it's pretty tricky because at least where we end up is that we would not like to sit with a 10% ownership of something we do not control at all, but we are there because, yeah, it looks good, to be honest, and we've come to terms with that if we really are to go into a partnership, we need to have a meaningful size and some sort of control or meaningful influence of that entity. Else you will sit up with basically a financial investment, and we are a product tanker company. You're not the other part. So it's just super interesting, but it's difficult to find the right thing. We will focus on the three things I said in the first part.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, the collaboration is happening all over the place. And at the biggest level, as an industry, I think somebody mentioned it this morning on an earlier panel, we are the world's Scope 3 emissions, and what we can do without integrating with our customers and, and governments is essentially limited to, investments in efficient things that have a payback. And that, is helpful. But, as an industry, as a group of tankers, things, we have to work with the customers to change things. We work within the pool structure. We belong to pools because pools can create incentives. A pool can create incentives for the people in the pool to invest in higher quality silicone paint that doesn't need to be, your hull doesn't need to be scrubbed when you've been sitting in warm water for a lot of ways. There are things that they set up to do that. And ultimately, if you've got, say, like, very, high-speed feedback in your performance on a voyage, we can try to change the structure on the voyage with customers where, they've given you orders to proceed at a certain speed. If things change and they don't need the ship quite that fast, as the financial incentives are right now for a tanker voyage, there's no benefit to the customer of allowing you to slow down and burn less fuel. So maybe there's a way that you start to integrate more carefully so that if a voyage actually burns less, consumes less, costs less, that there's a way to work that out with the customers. And then I just say finally, maybe even with banks and capital sources, there's so much now that's evolved. I think people recognize that we're talking about a transition, not a replacement. And so when we're going to meet with our bankers, we're meeting with the people in charge of the stuff in the bank who used to be something you'd consider back office, but now it's really front office. They are, and they get excited by some of the things that we're doing, and then they're starting to bring products. Again, even for people who generally buy older ships, recognizing that part of this transition is, creating real efficiency on older ships. And, our goal is that when we buy a ship, that's a positive thing for the environment, that ship was already on the water, it was going to burn a certain amount of, oil till the end of its life, emit a certain amount of carbon, we buy it, it's going to burn less. So you're working really on all fronts so that you're part of there, and as things change, you're at the table.
And I was wondering, is there more that can be done, do you think, to promote or encourage collaboration? Because clearly that is going to be key, a sharing of knowledge, a sharing of experience, a choosing of technologies as well, because one of the inhibitors, I think, is that there are a number of solutions for the same problem, and people hold back until they know which is going to be the solution that's widely adopted. Maybe if I come to you first, Alex, do you think there are things that can be done to promote or encourage collaboration? Is there more sort of top-level IMO-style leadership needed to bring people together, or should it come, from more of a grassroots level?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't comment on the IMO specifically, but I think there's plenty of really encouraging forums that have sprung up in the last few years, some of which have already been mentioned on this panel, where owners have shown a real willingness to kind of drop some of the usual guardedness around commercial strategy and sort of forward-looking view, and come together and try and challenge the existing roadmaps quite publicly and actually do something about it. So I think that's already gathered quite ahead of steam. In terms of specific concrete actions, I think it really comes a lot down also to personal close relationships that you have with your charterers, and that's a very specific thing it can only be developed after many years. And getting the trust there that you can have an open and frank conversation now about things that are going to affect you quite drastically in the medium to longer term. This is not a conversation you can have with someone that you've only just started doing business with. So I think track record and personal relationship is actually absolutely key to all this. And picking up on something that Kim said, I also agree, talking about joint ventures, actually becoming a venture capital firm or starting a venture capital arm and actually investing in new technologies for a company whose core competence is ship owning, it is fraught with risk, I think, and needs to be sort of really very carefully thought about before you do it. think we'd be more in favour of, and our shareholders would be more in favour of us, for instance, trialling new technologies, offering our ships up for trials and things like that, rather than necessarily deploying capital on non-controlling stakes in technology firms.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it's a bit too big task for an order to be putting the rules for this one, to be honest. I think we need to work a little bit above us, state, IMO, where we can have a clear fuel of the future. I mean, there are many projects, as you mentioned, there's ammonia, hydrogen, etc. I think it takes time. It's a little bit like the cars, no? Years back, the electric car was something nobody could visualize. Now, probably where we are going. I think it will be the same for ships. Point is, we are running out of time, and standardize a solution on the logistic, because, okay, there are some corridors where you can have a special trade. Let's say on the Capes you have Australia. I think in the newspaper was some announcement last week. On a liner service, maybe on the containers. But when you are on tram service with smaller ships going from A to B, then from B to C and change it, and if you arrive to the ports and you don't have the fuel, what do you do? So it has to be something more standardized at higher level, and I think we are still far from that.
But I think it helps, doesn't it, that it's taken seriously at the highest levels in shipping. I mean, in some industry sectors, there's maybe a bit of cynicism around it being a checkbox exercise. You know, you sign up to targets and then you give it to a junior manager to do the PR bit of saying, well, we've achieved this target or that target. I think shipping, my impression is, it's taken very seriously at the top level, and it isn't delegated. And so you have the real decision makers who are focusing on these issues and talking to each other.
Absolutely. See, that is the case now. It's in the agenda of every, mainly even more on public companies, as we were talking the other day. Yeah. It's also for the banking point of view, you need to be clear.
Yeah, and I think that's, you mentioned public, whether you're public or private, unless you're, a private family, whether you're public or private, ultimately your capital sort of comes from the same foundations, endowments, institutions, and banks, the other capital markets. And this is, this has to be, it has to be a competitive advantage for you when you're competing for capital. I think sometimes the collaboration is a little bit easier for a private company. Public companies, I'm seeing them change on this, but traditionally, you're trying to beat your competitors every quarter with better results. And one of the ways you get better results is to operate your ships more efficiently, burn less fuel, have, higher earnings. And so I've spoken to some people, I remember, in past years, to try to just talk and share notes, and they've sort of said, we sort of consider this our IP. We, this is, again, on the private, if someone else is making, more money, that doesn't directly hurt me. My investors only care how much money they gave me and how much I'm going to give back to them. But I'm seeing that change on the public side as well. As I said, some of these centers where people are contributing like real resources and strongly disseminating results and tests, understanding that it's actually better for their brand as well. It is also a competitive advantage in the markets to be that leader.
Yeah.
But I just got this reflection when you talked about collaboration and you talked about making business. But so it's just, what is the purpose of all this ESG? If it's to save the planet, perhaps we should find a way of sharing good ideas and initiatives. We talked about carbon levy earlier on. That is sort of the stick. Perhaps there should be a carrot for good ideas. So I don't have the solution, but there are many people in the room. Perhaps there's a solution there, because else we'll just keep ours, you will keep yours. But there could be a way we could collaborate more.
Okay.
More carrot as well as a stick. I don't know whether there are any questions. Yeah. Any questions from the floor? Yeah, okay. So I wonder, what the panel, I'll come to each of you in turn, starting with Alex. Sorry, Alex, but it's because you're the other far end of the table. What do you think is currently the biggest single obstacle to investment in new shipping technology? So the sorts of things that I was thinking were, just the cost of the technology and implementing it, the fact that there may be immature, unproven technologies, the operational risk of being an early mover. But just wondering what your take, the single biggest obstacle.
Well, I mean, all of the above. I think the chicken and egg between the technology and the fuel to run it, and that can only be solved through regulatory intervention. So I think that's probably the key thing that is missing, where consensus has to be built.
Yeah. Thank you. Kim?
Yeah, I think it's the same. Pricing, how expensive it is currently, there's a gap there. We know we will close that gap at some point in time. We've done that in so many other industries and on so many other technologies, so we're going to do that. But right now, the gap is huge, so that's quite a challenge and an obstacle.
Yeah. Yep. It's cost and uncertainty. I mean, as I said earlier, you need your car to put some gas, no, on the ships, and you don't know yet. So it's that unknown is what probably, as an investor, as an owner, slow down a little bit.
Most difficult for you, Hugh. Last one.
Well, I think notwithstanding the 18 months that have finally been great for containers and bulk, and the next 18 months that are going to be great for tankers, the industry's done a pretty good job of destroying capital for the last 10, 12, 15 years when we weren't trying to do anything other than make money. And so to add, you do have to go and make investment decisions, get capital, private, public, whatever else it is. So I mean, at this point, there aren't investable projects for ships standing alone. There are thankfully some groups out there, especially more sort of liner service, ferry service, other things where a whole integrated system. Some of these green corridors are starting to come together. Eventually, the people at this table, we don't know where our ships are going to go, and so there aren't really things that can happen yet. But as I said, we stay in. You're watching things. There are encouraging things happening. And back to the Maersk McKinney Center, they had this stack of things that I kind of liked. They had we need the first movers, but then we really need the fast followers. And they had five. They had people divided into 5 groups or whatever. And I think honestly, that's sort of what we'd like. What we'd like to be. We can't go out and raise capital to be a first mover. It's not realistic. But we want to be very much in the conversation, talking to people, and as soon as it is investable, then the money comes. And if you've got the people who are dedicated to making that happen, you will get that S-curve that and the transition will happen at that point probably faster than people realize.
Thank you, Hugh. Well, maybe we'll leave it there with first movers and fast followers. And thank you to you and the rest of the panel, and hope you all found it very interesting. Thank you.
Thanks.